Okay. Dear Father in heaven, thank you that we could be here today. Thank you for leading in our lives to this moment in time where we know that prophecy is being fulfilled. We ask that you would let your Holy Spirit be here and fill us, anoint our thoughts, anoint my words, and just speak and let us be strengthened by what we hear today, so that each of us will be used by you to your glory to spread the gospel during this time. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. So, last time I did a presentation, I was ending a study on the book of Joel and on the 4 insects of Joel and what that means. And I was closing that up, and I was talking about some things on the charts and what this means. These are the 1843 and the 1850 chart. And I was talking about how the Millerites viewed some of these times in prophecy, and I was just sort of reviewing that, and I was pointing out 1837, which is written right here. And as far as I knew at the time, I thought, well, we don't know of any prophecies that were fulfilled in 1837. And so, I was giving an illustration of what that means, and fortunately someone corrected me and Betsy let me know that Dave had done a study on that, and then Dave provided me the information, and then I did more study on that, and I found out that this time, 1837, actually has some important events that took place during this time, and they were events that were both occurred during 1837, but also there were events that occurred just prior to 1798, and during this time period that culminated in terms of the interest of people in this country and across the world in the Millerite message, and it came to a heightened period starting in 1837. So it's really important to understand these things, and it also, for me, increases the faith in how God has led in the prophecies in our day, and how we've been studying the events of the 7 thunders and what has happened with 9/11, 2001, and before that. So 1837 is sort of in the middle of the first angel's message of Revelation. And so I'd like to first have us read that message in Revelation 14, verses 6 and 7. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come." And this was the first angel's message, and it was started with the prophecies that William Miller had, and a number of other people who were presenting the time prophecies from Daniel and Revelation. And so I'm going to read also a quote from have to look at the cheat sheet here. This is from Uriah Smith, and it's found in the Ellen White CD-ROM under periodicals, and a lot of these quotes are from that section. And it says that this was fulfilled in the special proclamation of the everlasting gospel based on the prophecies and the termination of the prophetic periods between the years 1837 and 1844. So there was a 7-year period between 1837 and 1844 where these prophecies had special significance. And so just to briefly update on this, the 1837, the first angel's message started before that, and it was empowered in August 11, 1840, with the ending of the second woe with the Ottoman supremacy ceasing, and there's some things that happened with that within the Muslim world. And it was a prophecy that was publicly presented across the world as to what it would mean and when that would end. And then that prophecy happened, and that just really highlighted to the world that the importance of the prophecies that were being studied during Miller's time. So I have a supplement here that I'm going to review along with the handout. The handout has 3 links, and if you go to the internet and you click on those links, you can get an outline of the historic events that happened particularly during 1837, and you could take a look at that. And I'm only looking at one of those links and just highlighting some of the things in 1837. On January 22nd, there was a large earthquake in southern Syria, and it killed thousands. So this was the first big event in 1837. And this event highlighted concern all over the world about the increase in earthquakes that had happened, starting with the Lisbon earthquake in 1755. So that was just before, the Lisbon earthquake occurred just before 1798 when the papacy lost its power. Okay. And then February 13, there was a riot in New York, and this riot was due to a combination of poverty and an increase in the cost of flour and some economic things that were happening. So we have some events that were happening. Increase in earthquakes was one. And then we have economic problems. And then on August 25, the first U.S. electric printing press was patented by somebody named Thomas Davenport. So we had inventions. The electric printing press was really important because God led in several inventions that occurred during this time so that the message of the prophecies would be printed and spread rapidly around the world. And so it's very significant that these things happened during this year. On March 4, no, that's not the one I wanted to read. On May 10, there was an economic panic in New York City. It was, for all practical purposes, a stock market crash. And this caused the banks to fail, and the unemployment reached record levels. So, once again, economic problems, a stock market crash. On May 31st, there was another riot that occurred in Boston, and this was a riot that came about because of ethnic tensions between English Americans and Irish Americans. So there was an increase of racial tensions. But this is a public website that's listing these historic events. But if we really study into history during that time, this was more than racial tensions, it was also religious tensions. Okay. And the reason for that is that predominantly at that time, Irish Americans were Catholic. So there were a lot of racial and religious conflicts happening with this particular type of a riot that was occurring. On June 13, the first Mormon missionaries were sent out. Just a piece of information. On June 16, Charles Goodyear obtained the first patent for rubber. That was an important invention. We owe our driving around this country to that invention. June 20th, the Queen Victoria, at the age of 18, became Queen of England, and she ruled for 63 years, and that her reign ended in 1901, so there was a change there.
What are you on now?
I'm reading separately from the handout. So I just want to kind of whet everyone's appetite by this information before I come to the handout. On June 4th, there was a large railway that was the world's first long-distance railway, and it was in England and was built between Birmingham and Liverpool. On June 25, the first commercial use of an electric telegraph was successful and demonstrated by William Cooke and Charles Wheatstone. And this occurred between Euston and Camden Town in London. So once again, inventions. Telegraph was a very important invention. Then on November 7th, there was a man, and his name was Elijah Lovejoy, and he was in Alton, Illinois, and he was an abolitionist. And if you read in history, even public history in Wikipedia and those kind of things on Ellen White, she was an abolitionist her whole life, very strongly against slavery. So this was a man, he had a printing shop. That printing shop had been destroyed by pro-slavery people at least twice. So this was the third time they were trying to destroy it, and he died trying to protect his. So the racial relations were really an issue building up to just before the Civil War. On November 8th, the first seminary college in the U.S. was founded for women. So women were starting to become freer to study and be equal in studying and learning information. On November 15, Isaac Putman introduced his shorthand version. This was, I believe, the steno system. It had to do with shorthand that people used in the courts and for newspapers, for listening to people in Congress or presidents or leaders giving addresses. So this was also a very important thing to happen during this time period. And then on December 29th, there was a steam-powered threshing machine that was patented, so inventions that helped produce more food economically and quickly, or at least make it so that food would be more marketable with the threshing. So there's some patterns in this that are important to recognize for the 1837 time period. First, with the inventions, there are three major inventions that were used by God for the Millerite prophecies to go around the world. The telegraph, the printing, the shorthand, all of that. The railways, what was happening there. There's parallels that have happened in our time period with how these prophecies have been sent on YouTube and on DVDs and just all of that. Okay, so there's similar patterns there. There was a financial economic crash in 1837. We already mentioned that. Economic panic that occurred. And this was followed by a 7-year depression. In our time period, 7 years to the day after 9/11, we had an economic crash in this country, a significant economic crash. So there's definitely some similar parallels there. On page 2, there were signs in the heavens. And before I read some of this, I want to point out that in looking at this website that has the history of events that happened in 1837, it doesn't list the signs in the heavens. I have found that when you look up history, they don't always list those events accurately anymore. Some events that we know when we study prophecy happened, you can't always find those events. Things have been messed with in terms of a history that's been well documented. So, signs in the heaven, January 25, 1837, the Aurora Borealis, which is a normal event that we've come to look forward to hearing about, seeing pictures of if we're not actually able to see it. It had some unusual signs that people viewed with fear. And some of the things that happened with that was that one place that it happened in this country, it was near a mountain, and the people who witnessed the scene informed other people that the Aurora Borealis, the lights, were like the waves of fire rolling down the mountain. And generally, the snow that covered the ground appeared like fire mingled with blood. So it's pretty dramatic. That's an understatement. And so the people who saw that felt like it was connected to the heavens being on fire. That's a quote from the Bible. And that it resembled the prophetic description of the last day, that many were amazed. Children who looked at it were scared, and they started to ask if it was the coming of the judgment, and even the animals trembled. So this was something that was happening quite a few places during 1837. So this happened in America, but it also happened in Great Britain. So another sign, and I'm going to remember, I was talking about the earthquake in Syria that happened in January of 1837. This was the anxiety in the world around earthquakes was building since the Lisbon earthquake in 1755. And there's a reason why that anxiety built to a peak in 1837. So I'm going to go back and read a few things from the Lisbon earthquake. Correction, I said the date wrong. Lisbon earthquake was in 1755. And this occurred in the Kingdom of Portugal on Saturday 1, November 1755, and it was on the holiday of All Saints' Day, which is an important holiday, especially in the Catholic Church. And it was the largest earthquake that had happened in the then known world, and it was like between 8.5 and 9 on the Richter scale. And there were fires and a huge tsunami, and it almost totally destroyed Lisbon. And later on, when they were able to measure the epicenter and where it came from, they were able to measure the effects of this earthquake over a large area, and this led to the events of what we now know as seismology and people that study earthquakes. And it occurred along a fault line called the Azores-Gibraltar Fault, and the plates run westward from Gibraltar into the Atlantic. I think that's significant when there's quakes running from west to east or vice versa, and that has a meaning, but I'm not going to speak about that right now. I just want to point that has some significance. So the shocks from this earthquake were felt in Europe, Finland, North Africa, Greenland, the Caribbean, The tsunamis measured as high as 66 feet. My friends in Europe would rather I say 20 meters, but I'm not good at understanding how to translate things from meters to feet, so I'll just read both of those. It went through the coast of North Africa, Martinique, Barbados, across the Atlantic. It hit England with a 10-foot wave. It hit Ireland. So it went quite a ways. And it was estimated that it killed somewhere between 30 to 40,000 people just in Lisbon. There was a town connected to Morocco that the tsunami and the earthquake totally wiped out. Okay. And then also because Lisbon was at that time a city with a high percentage of Catholic population and a high number of Catholic cathedrals, this raised some spiritual questions in the world around that. And one of the questions was almost every single church was destroyed in this earthquake. And so theologians were asking questions about the issue of a divine judgment. And the important thing about this is, well, here this earthquake happened in 1755, right? And I'm talking about 1837. Well, the truth is that science didn't have the information that we have now about earthquakes. For example, after the earthquake in Indonesia and the tsunami, within about a year or less, we had all kinds of information that earthquake scientists were telling us about the size of that fault, how much it had split along the fault line, and how it had changed the time in this, that the earth goes around in a day and a year and all of that. And there was just a lot of information that they had, that we had available to us within a year or so after that earthquake. They didn't have earthquake scientists really before this earthquake. Those scientists became scientists as a result of this earthquake. And the information that they had to provide came out to the public in 1837. And then during this time from 1837 and following, for a number of years, there were a large number of earthquakes, large size, all over the world, and so people were becoming more concerned about that. And so then here in 1837, here's the scientific information that's being presented. So, coming to signs in the heavens, fulfillment of Joel, the prophet Joel, I'm on page 4, quoted by Peter, predicted wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. So once again, what was happening with the aurora borealis was putting the people's minds thinking about the judgment and concern, why are all these things happening? And these signs were happening more than just the one that's documented here on January 25 of 1837. And they were concerned about a number of other signs, including the earthquakes. And people started asking questions once again about two other signs that had occurred before this. One was the sign of the dark day and the moon turning to blood on May 19, 1780, and that was known as the dark day. It was a period of darkness that was longer in density, extent, and duration than has ever been recorded, and that went along with Joel 2:31. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And then the moon that same night after the dark day turned into red blood. And what's important about this in terms of 1837 is that as people studied these signs, they came back again to reading about this and comparing it with the other things that were happening in 1837. And the other thing that's important for us is that we study where it's documented about these events occurring and that we're clear about it. And the reason for that is there are people who are putting false information on the internet about these events and trying instead to say other things that are supporting the ecumenical movement that's going on around the world. So when I looked on the internet for information about the moon turning to blood, I found that there is a link, and I put the link there, link on YouTube, and it's called The Four Tetrarchs, or Red Moons. And it is stated by this group, and it's presented on a Protestant religious program, that this is a Jewish prophecy that says that when a full moon comes on the date of a Jewish holiday like the Passover or the Feast of Tabernacles, and when there's two of them, it's prophetically significant when there's two that occur in 1 year. And so what they're saying, they're calling this a red moon, but not because the moon turns red. The moon does not turn red. They're calling it a red moon because the moon is happening at a time with a Jewish holiday, and they're saying that there's 4 of them that are happening between 2014 and 2015, and that this is prophetically significant. That means that something's happening in terms of whether it's the end times or God coming or whatever, and that they really don't know because you can't you can't put a time on it.
Do you know what those 4 are?
It's 4 holidays like the...
It's 4 Passover in each year, and I believe the other one is the Feast of Tabernacles.
There was 4 of them.
There's 2 this year and 2 next year.
Yeah. I heard them, Paul Crouch and a group of men talking about this a month or 2 ago on the TV.
So you heard Paul Crouch on the TV talking about,
talking about the 4 blood moons, and the man had written a book about it. I can't remember.
You're right.
Somebody had written a book about the 4 blood moons and the 4 feast days that this coincided with.
Yeah, there's a book out on it.
Yeah.
Right. And they have the YouTube video of, it's probably the person that you heard talking about it. And so then I went to see, well, what is this about? Because I have had an interest this week in finding out what the Bible is saying about moons, and I've been looking it up. And the people who are saying this are ignoring what happened here. They're saying, oh no, there was nothing of prophetic significance with the moons that happened in this time period. They're discounting this history that we know. So we've kind of thought, well, I know this, I've been taught this, I've gone to prophecy seminars, annual revelation, and they've talked about this. Yeah, that's in history, but there's been an effort to discount this. And now there's an effort to say something that is false. So there's an agenda with that, and we should be aware of it. So I'm going to read those texts as we're ending talking about the moon. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. That's from Joel 2, verse 31. And it says the same thing in Acts 2, verse 20. And in Revelation 6, verse 12, it talks about the 6th seal. And it says, I looked, and when he opened the 6th seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became blood. So every place that I have read in the Bible, where it's talking about the moon as a sign, it's talking about the moon turning red blood. And this other evidence that's being presented is calling it a red blood moon, but it's not.
So is this when a full moon happens on a feast day or the Passover?
Right. Any one of the Jewish holidays. There's more Jewish holidays than the feast day or Passover. Yeah. It's a full moon or a new moon. I didn't. Yeah, they have a specific way of looking at it. Yeah.
It's a full moon.
Full moon. Okay. Yeah, a full moon.
Big
Yeah.
difference between the two.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. All of these things people were thinking about already. The public consciousness, without a preacher presenting this information, was already thinking about this. People were thinking. And they were also thinking about November 13, 1833, when the stars fell from heaven. I'm going to read this and then I want to comment on how some people are discounting this. The stars shall fall from heaven. This is another sign of the near approach of Christ and the end of the world. The Revelator says in chapter 13, the stars of heaven fell from earth even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. Has this sign been given? It has. November 13, 1833 was seen precisely such an appearance as the Revelator describes. Though shooting stars have been seen at other times, so far as known, nothing of this kind has ever was ever seen before 1789. The atmosphere was literally filled with falling stars shooting in every direction, answering exactly to the description in Revelation 13. If that was not a fulfillment of the prophecy, it will be difficult for any man to show how it ever can be fulfilled. So this is quoted from, it says JVHE 1843, and some page numbers there. This is in the periodical section of the Ellen White CD-ROM. There's a number of books for which I'm using quotes from in here that are in that section. And we can be grateful that people documented it in those books, all this information historically. In the last year, when I've gone back and tried to look on the internet for historical information about this time period, what's available is on the internet is things that are discounting this. Even though there's all this historical information there, they're discounting it. So that should tell us something.
Revelation 6:13.
Oh, Revelation 6:13, sorry. So I'm going to briefly mention and go through some of the other points here. There's some information on someone named Elder R. Hutchinson, and he published a paper called The Voice of Elijah. And this paper went out beginning in 1837 from Canada, and it went over most of the then known world. It says it went to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France, Germany, Constantinople, Rome, all parts of the British Kingdom and its colonies. So he was a missionary to Rome. And this was information about the prophecies. In 1837, William Miller, as he studied, it became very clear to him that that man does not have an immortal soul. There's a whole paragraph there on that. And that added to his feeling the call of God to preach about the prophecies and feeling that, wow, the end of the world is coming, these prophecies are coming, and we don't have an immortal soul. So if people don't understand this and get this, then this is it. You know, when you die or if the judgment comes, that's it. So he came to understand that truth, that when we die, we are not immortal. And then more books were sent. And all over the then known world, things that he wrote, his lectures. He had 16 lectures that on the prophecies, and he started to go around, first giving those lectures in 1837, although he had given lectures before that. And as he gave these lectures, he talked about the stars from heaven, and he talked about the moon turning to blood, and he talked about the other events that were happening actually in 1837. He talked about some pestilences, some people dying of cholera. There were a high number of that for the 20 years before that. And he talked about earthquakes, and he was able to use that information to present how these prophecies were important, and that these events were important for us to pay attention to when we study prophecy. And they were showing us the importance of the Bible and that Jesus was coming. And so I'm not going to read through the history there, but there's a lot of the history that on William Miller and this time period. It's all very important, how the momentum was growing, and he would present his lectures. And there was a turning point during this time where people started more and more to listening to his lectures, and the Holy Spirit was being poured out. And people would come to hear his lectures, and they would come ready to fight against him and say that he didn't know what he was talking about, and they would be converted, a number of them. Yeah. In 1837, there was a man in Chinese who had a vision, and this vision told him things that started to open up the interest in China. And you know, after this time period, there were missionaries that went to China and spread the gospel there. So this was the start of that. So what that says, when someone in another country that hasn't had the gospel really spread is having a vision from God that is opening that door, that's telling you some things are happening that we can't see. And they're happening spiritually, and it just adds to our understanding of these prophecies that we know about.